this panel, From Plenty to Poverty, Relations of Politics and Territory for the Human and Non-Human Animals. So thanks for coming. We have 4 great papers today, and we're going to be starting with Andrej, who's presenting on world ecology and the politics of delinking. So, welcome, Andrej.
I will, but is there a way to bring the microphone because I can't
Do you want to hold it, or do you want to have it on a stand?
This is fine. I will do my best.
Okay.
Hello everybody. I am going to do the thing that I detest the most at academic conferences, which is I'm going to read, so I apologize for that. I absolutely hate it, but what can we do? World ecology. So students often ask, what on earth is world ecology? Why does it have a hyphen? Jason gave an introduction at the beginning, which I thought was marvelous. But I'm going to say a few more words about world ecology just as a framework. The way that I tend to think about what world ecology is an open concept, what Pierre Bourdieu famously called an open concept. It's a perspective that allows us to bring together, to reinterpret within a new explanatory framework, different, often disparate phenomena that are already known, but are often ignored or taken for granted. At the same time, and this I think is a great advantage of world ecology, it allows us to ask new questions for research. So when we speak of world ecology, the world ecology community of argument, we refer to a particular interpretation of capitalism as a civilization that combines accumulation of capital, concentration of power, and the production of nature. Capitalist civilization is a world ecology of capital, power, and nature. It is also a way of organizing nature, structure, to use a conveniently naturalistic image borrowed from Jason, as islands of commodity production and exchange within the ocean of unwaged labor indispensable for capital accumulation. Capitalism has a strange, bizarre, twisted, perverse, system of value relations predicated on a dialectic of exploitation and appropriation, exploitation of human labor and within the commodity system, and appropriation of unpaid work of people in nature. Now, of course, there is no exploitation with appropriation. This is the trick of world ecology. And appropriation, a slightly unusual term perhaps, is defined as a set of extra economic processes that assimilate and with great violence unpaid work of so-called cheap natures into the circuit of capital. The emphasis that world ecology places on these twin processes of appropriation and exploitation brings, and this I think is one of the greatest advantages of this framework, brings different forms of work in the same unified theoretical field. This is what Jason calls trialectics of work, that includes labor power, unpaid human work, and work of nature as a whole. I won't go into the finesse of world ecology, into the theory of commodity frontier, into the notion that world ecology is also not a theoretical perspective, as some people tend to believe. It can be a method, way of organizing inquiry. But I'm going to move to world ecology and its relationship to politics because this is our topic today. Our topic today is planetary utopias confronting capitalist dystopias. And of course, to address this, we have to talk about politics of capitalist world ecology. And I would say that politics could be defined as anything that includes institutions, activities that employ violence against human and extra-human natures in order to facilitate processes of exploitation and appropriation. Definition of politics would also have to include different forms of resistance employed by human and extra-human natures that obstruct these processes of exploitation and appropriation. This is this distinction that illuminates the dialectic that Jason spoke about earlier between capitalism as a project and capitalism as a process. If capitalism as a project seeks to organize the world in the image of capital, capitalism as a historical process is a dystopian and contradictory historical reality limited by what we call planetary utopian practices. Now, the agreement in world ecology conversation seems to be that historical capitalism has entered a phase of civilizational crisis, a singular systemic crisis that does not lend itself into the division between social and political movements. World ecological perspective militates against both labor fundamentalism and environmental reductionism, both being defined by separation of nature from society. This is, of course, profoundly inaccurate. Labor exists in nature, nature exists in labor, and the task of revolutionary praxis is to bring together crisis of biosphere and crisis of productive and reproductive work together. This new political common sense, 10 minutes already, is sometimes expressed as a slogan, no politics of nature without work and no politics of work without nature. It's a great slogan, but we should add to this that there is really no politics of nature or politics of work without the politics of utopia. There is no, and there should be no, world ecological thinking without utopian thinking. And this is why in this paper, which I'm probably not going to be able to read completely, I'm going to propose a dialogue between two very unlikely suspects. One being my late Professor Samir Amin, great late sociologist of unequal exchange, and the other Abdullah Hocalan, imprisoned Kurdish sociologist of freedom. What connects them is the idea of delinking, which is the title of my talk, The Politics of Delinking. And several years ago, anthropologist Thurs.F proposed that we should rethink Samir Amin's concept of delinking in terms of selective delinking and selective engagement. And I really like this idea. The notion of delinking, many of you are familiar with it, is Samir's most distinctive contribution to what we might call the new political vision. It is the idea of autocentric development, as he called it, a refusal, creative refusal really, to submit to the demands of the worldwide law of value. And he developed this concept of delinking in two phases of his work. In the first iteration of the concept, delinking was firmly based on the institution of the nation state. Samir believed that the creative strength of the first phase in the history of national liberation has been exhausted. So we need fresh, new alternative for the second phase in the project of national liberation, and that was delinking. The main actor in the strategy of delinking is the Popular Alliance forged by revolutionary intelligentsia gathered around the nation state. Samir's thinking was actually very interesting. If enough peripheral countries were to come together and pressure world capitalism from outside, the capitalist world system would shrink. He was averse to any kind of cultural nationalism. Some of the most exciting pages in his brilliant book on Eurocentrism were about that. Delinking, he used to say, is neither commercial isolation nor culturalist nationalism. But what I'm really interested in is the second phase in the development of this concept, where he spoke of delinking at the level of world regions. Delinking here was suggested as a part of what he called polycentric world of autonomous regions. Regional delinking implied active dialectical relationship, this is a quote, with the capitalist world system, a process of selective cutting off and selective engagement, active insertion capable of modifying the conditions of capitalist globalization. Refusing worldwide capitalist expansion does not necessitate isolation, but re-articulation of economic and political development in terms relevant to localized needs and concerns. And I think that he was right, and I think this is a very intriguing proposal. Delinking on a regional level, viewed from a world ecological perspective, as a political organization of the planetary liberation of life, could offer a fresh alternative to what I believe are old, tired ideologies of national liberation that are based exclusively on the nation state. And to a large extent, this project of regional delinking is already underway in the non-state space of the Democratic Federation of Northern Syria and in the Kurdish region of Bakur in Turkey. These revolutions have been inspired by ideas put forward by Abdullah Hocalan, imprisoned by the Turkish state since the 90s. And I have no idea if Hocalan read Samir Amin in his Turkish prison cell. I know that he read Emmanuel Wallerstein and Fernand Braudel, but I suspect that he might have, as his ideas of democratic delinking bear a striking resemblance to the ideas advocated by the great Egyptian revolutionary Amin. Like him, Hocalan believes that we live at a time that it's necessary to reinvent a new kind of national liberation project. In his formulation, when society and civilization meet, the main contradiction is between the state and democracy. So in our collective effort to resolve this contradiction that for him is central, we need to really excavate, reinvent emancipatory traditions of what he calls democratic modernity. And democratic modernity is both a process and a project, historical process and a political project. And it's conceived not as an alternative to capitalist accumulation, but as an entirely different civilization. We can speak of trialectics of democratic modernity that includes liberation of nature from capitalism, liberation of democracy from the state, and liberation of women from masculine domination. Another, and to me, one of the most intriguing constitutive elements of democratic modernity is democratic nation. For Öcalan, the main problem of modernity, the most tyrannical aspect of modernity, is this coupling of state and nation. Nationalism, he says, is not just an obstacle, but a form of religious attachment imposed by the nation state. And this is why the Kurdish revolutionaries in Rojava and Baku speak of democratic nation as an alternative to statist nation. Democratic nation, they say, is an organization of life detached from the state. It is a right of society to construct itself. It's a collective based on free agreement and plural identity. So instead of an ethno-statist nation, we have a form of collective life that is not bound by any political boundaries, that actually exists without resting on power and state. Öcalan says that democratic nation, conceived in this way, does not require dominant ethnicity or dominant language. This is the organization of collective life based on homeland and market, not on homeland and market, but on freedom and solidarity. Territory, in that sense, is important, and the sense of belonging to a place is, of course, very natural, but this is a place-based and not place-bound relationship. It is a tool of life, as he says. The political expression of democratic nation is democratic confederalism, and he provides a delicious definition of democracy here as practice and process of self-governance in a non-state society. Democracy is governance that is not a state. It is a power of communities to govern themselves without a state. There's absolutely nothing that is permanent or fixed about the processes of democracy and autonomy. Democracy, he says, abhors schedules and timelines. As he writes in one of his most moving passages, democratic nation, democratic autonomy, represents a truth that requires devotion at the level of real love. Just as there is no room for false love in this voyage, there is also no room for uncommitted travelers. The question of when the construction of the democratic nation will be complete is a redundant one. This is a construction that will never be finished. It is an ongoing process. The construction of democratic nation has the freedom to recreate itself at every instant. In social terms, there can be no utopia and no reality that is more ambitious than this. This says, he calls in his work, or I really recommend, soon it's going to be translated and published in English, Sociology of Freedom, calls for radical overturning of the social Darwinism, which he sees widely promoted by liberal intellectuals and state-centered social sciences. Against the civilization fueled by possessive individualism and nation-state, he advocates for democratic civilization created by the acts of everyday communism. Against the utopian finality of a nation-state, he emphasizes actually existing democratic practices retrieved from both past and present. In agreement with the Marxist geographer Andrej Faber, he speaks of the power of everyday life. Society without a state, he says, is not society without history, but it is a society that is an enemy to the capitalist present, resisting what he calls societicide. Society becomes ecological society, predicated on the liberation of women, the so-called first colony, in the 5,000 years long history of domination. Progress is something that is spontaneous and free experimentation with new social forms. Decentralization is a form of social organization. It does not involve geographical isolation, but a particular sociological use of geography. Öcalan sees federalism as a basic principle of human organization, and democratic federalism is an act of social self-determination. This form of delinking that he's proposing from the world capitalist modernity is effected through production of alternative and oppositional conceptions of a non-state space, recover invention of the new old world that would consist of multiple autonomous micro-societies bound together within mutually agreed federal structures. He suggests a world federation as a successor to the hierarchical interstate organization of a capitalist world system. The statist nation, he says, would be replaced by a geographical confederation of confederations. He maintains that the conditions are ripe in the 21st century to avoid the fate of confederal structures eliminated by the nation-states in the 19th century, and to achieve what he calls the worldwide victory of democratic confederalism. If the Kurds in Turkey and Syria are at the forefront of this struggle, he says, for global democratization, this is because the liberation of Kurds is linked to the liberation of life, humanity, and nature. He writes, in accordance with their historical and social reality, the Kurds have vigorously turned towards the construction of a democratic nation. They have lost nothing by ridding themselves of a nation-state in which they never believed. They are rid of a very heavy burden that brought them to the brink of annihilation. Indeed, who could be better poised to pave the way to a state-free modernity than stateless people engaged in a bitter anti-fascist struggle for dignity and life? The stateless democracy of Kurdish Rojava becomes, in his words, a model for another Middle East and another possible world of autonomous regions. Weaving all of these different threads together, he arrives at the final definition of democratic modernity as an integral organization of democratic nation, communalism, and ecology, established in the process of delinking from the world of capitalist modernity. This system of liberated life stands in opposition to the capitalist trinity of nation-state, capitalism, and patriarchy. Taken together, these utopian visions, promoted by Amin and Öcalan, visions of planetary delinking and planetary confederation, of nature and humanity and nature, of liberation of women, colonies, and nature, of democratic socialism without a state, of democratic nation without nationalism, constitute an insurgent and integral ecology of hope that deserves an important place, I believe, in the utopistics